Senator from Washington.
Madam President, I come to the floor to talk about Senate Bill S-47, which is Senator Murkowski and my bill that is a package of public land issues that has been working its way through the Congress now for several years. And I'd like to point out to people who may not be as familiar with the aspect of the interior side of the Energy and Interior Committee, that the interior side is the long history of our nation, that we decided a long time ago that we needed to have oversight of our lands and management of our lands. And S-47, this legislation before us today, is a recognition that our climate is changing and that we need new tools and carry out new responsibilities as it relates to managing those public lands. Now, I want to thank my colleague from Alaska, Senator Murkowski, for her incredible leadership. I know that we're going to hopefully go to final passage of this bill sometime today, and I thank her for her good bipartisan work on this legislation. It's safe to say, even though we both come from the Pacific Northwest, we don't see eye to eye on every issue. But we have worked hard together to try to give the resources to local communities and to maintain the national interest where the national interest was at stake. So I can't applaud my colleague enough for her hard work and for her dedication on this particular package that is moving through the United States Senate. I also want to thank a lot of the staff who've worked on this issue, because to me, this is about the hard work of legislating and on many issues that maybe not everybody understands all the details, but I guarantee you all the details were critically important. So I want to particularly thank Mary Louise Wagner, who was the acting staff director for the Energy and Natural Resources Committee until recently, and certainly thank the dynamic duo of David Brooks and Sam Fowler, who as counsels to the committee have played an incredible role over the last many years in preserving what is very important about our public lands. I also want to thank additionally Camille Touton, Brian Petit, Rebecca Bonner, and several of the staff who have worked on many of the aspects of this package, Melanie Stansberry, David Repolog, both of whom are not Senate staffers anymore, and Megan Thompson from my staff, and Angela Becker-Dittman, who previously worked on this legislation. I'd also like to thank Senator Murkowski's staff, Brian Hughes, Kelly Donnelly, particularly Lucy Murfitt. I don't think we ever could have gotten this package through without her due diligence and hard work, Lane Dixon and Michelle Lane. And I also want to thank my colleagues in the House of Representatives. Certainly want to thank the staff director for Senator Grijalva, David Watkins, but I want to thank Congressman Grijalva for his hard work and Congressman Bishop. Safe to say that all four of us working together, Senator Murkowski, myself, and Congressman Bishop and Congressman Grijalva, definitely didn't always see eye to eye on these issues, but we worked hard to resolve these issues. I also want to thank my colleagues, Congressman Dave Reichert and Congressman Dan Newhouse, for their work on provisions particularly related to Washington State. And before I get started in talking about the major provisions of this legislation and why they're so important, I also have to call out several of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who have played key roles. Certainly the lands package would not be this lands package without my former colleague, Senator Orrin Hatch. He played such an incredible role over a long period of time in shaping the provisions as they affect Utah, and I want to thank him for that, and working with our colleague on this side of the aisle, Dick Durbin, on that important aspect of the package. We would not be where we are today on the fire provisions. My colleague, Senator Gardner, just talked about both Washington and Colorado have taken it on the chin time and time again for fires, and we know why it is so important to give firefighters and the agency the best possible tools they can have to locate the fire and to locate their firefighters. We need more hasty response to putting out fires, and having GPS and tracking systems are going to help us do that. So I thank my colleague from Colorado for helping with this legislation. And it's safe to say that without the strong determination of Senator Burr, we probably wouldn't be here right now on the permanent reauthorization of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. The Land and Water Conservation Fund and making it permanent represents the ethos that we have in the United States Senate here today, that public lands are important to our nation. They're important for recreating, for hunting, for fishing, for moving forward on access to these lands that are important for our veterans, for our school children, for those who just may want to go out and access the outdoors and reconnect. So the fact that we have had a big discussion here about, well, maybe we should return public lands to oil and gas drilling, this bill basically says, no, we're going to make a bigger investment in our public lands. We're going to make this program permanent, and we're going to make sure it is a key tool to continue to solve our problems to access to public land, particularly in parts of the country where the access to those public lands are being eroded by development. That is exactly what the Land and Water Conservation Fund helps us do, protect those areas so either we can continue to have, for example, elk hunting, which we just did a big project in Southwest Washington, or whether it's helping to improve access to Mount Rainier, a huge economic asset to the state of Washington, or whether it's as simple as giving a community like Auburn or Gaswork Park in Seattle access to a program that can help us keep open space in some of our most developing areas. So the Land and Water Conservation Fund has been a preeminent program for access to public lands, but it had been threatened by failing and expiring 3 years ago, and then only a temporary reauthorization, and then failing again to be reauthorized last September. So we have been under its expiration. So what we're doing here now is saying that this is a bipartisan issue, that more than 60 senators here in the United States Senate didn't see that we needed to further adjust this program. We needed to save this program. I emphasize this because I know my colleagues here in the Senate are going to get on to a larger discussion, which is the money that is set aside for the Land and Water Conservation Fund and how it is spent. And we're going to get into a conversation about how we take care of our maintenance and backlog with our national parks. I definitely believe that the mandatory spending for LWCF should be in a future budget, and I certainly believe we should do more to take care of our backlog and maintenance at our national parks. So I look forward to working with both sides of the aisle to push that through the United States Senate. But this legislation is amazing in the concept, as I said, as there are some, I say probably particularly in the administration, that want to return public land to oil and gas drilling. There is a bipartisan group here in the United States Senate that has said, no, we want to put more focus on saving our public lands. This legislation represents over 1.3 million acres of new wilderness, over 600,000 acres of wild and scenic river. It represents conveyances of land, but also taking land away from potential mining and development project, particularly in the state of Washington, in the Methow Valley, removing it from future mining and development. And it also continues to make investments in scenic heritage areas that are important to many parts of the United States of America. I want to talk about its investment in water. The water issues are like fire. They're not going to go away. It's only going to be what kind of tools do we give communities across the West, and I should probably say probably out throughout the United States, to deal with a changing climate and the impacts to less and less water. What this legislation says in ideas like the Yakima Basin Project is that we are not going to divide people and choose farming over fish. We're not going to divide people and basically choose one aspect of the environment over the other. It says we are going to look to smart, holistic, cost-effective ways to preserve more water and to work in conservation ways across our state and country. This is so important because the water issues are not going to go away. But this legislation represents important new tools to fight those challenges and to move forward in a way that I think will prove to be an example of what we should be doing in other parts of the United States. I look forward to my colleagues in trying to fund more water infrastructure improvements and conservation. This, I think, is just as important as any other infrastructure investment we're talking about in the United States Senate today. I know we see congestion in our streets. I know as an aviation state, we need to do more on aviation infrastructure, but I guarantee you we need to do more on water, and I look forward to working with my colleagues in the future. Now, one aspect I don't know if my colleagues who are on the floor have as much interest in as Senator Murkowski and I do, but I guarantee you this very small provision of the bill is very important to us, and that is on volcano monitoring. Having the incident of Mount St. Helens happen in Washington State and having active volcanoes in both Washington and in Alaska, it is so important for us to have the right science and monitoring of these volcanoes. So I was so glad to work with my colleague, Senator Murkowski, on that provision to give the latest and best tools to our scientists so they can give us the best important information for the future. So all in all, Mr. President, this legislation is a major investment in our public lands. It is the kind of hard work that happens behind the scenes that not everybody pays attention to. But I guarantee you, when it's the word land, there's a lot of people to pay attention to. There's local communities, there's landowners, there's environmental interests, there's all sorts of very, very thorny issues that have to be worked out. So I thank all my colleagues for their due diligence on this. I would only ask, some people have said, why is it that a lands package comes together like this and it's only, you know, at the end of a Congress, or in this case, held over from last Congress into this session? I hope our colleagues will give more attention to these important public policies. Public lands and access to lands are a juggernaut part of our economy. The outdoor economy is third behind finance and healthcare, the third most important sector. So for something that important, let's pay more attention. Let's give the tools to local communities and to these resources to manage this, to give more access to the American people, to do the things that will help us grow jobs and help us recreate for the future and preserve against a very challenging and threatening climate. I thank the President, and I yield the floor.